City at the End of Time by Greg Bear, a rather inscrutable book. So, Greg Bear was a pretty renowned author of science fiction. He penned works such as Blood Music and Darwin's Radio. He was a pretty big name in the field, but I had never read a book by Greg Bear, but I had picked this book up quite some time ago, and it's been sitting on my shelf for a couple years now, and so I decided it was finally time to read City at the End of Time. This book has a pretty low rating on Goodreads, and it has inspired a very mixed response from those who read it. It appears to be that appears to be the case, and I can totally see why, because this book right here is one of only two books that I have ever read, the other being William Gibson's Neuromancer, where when I closed the book, when I finished it, I could not tell you what happened. I could not describe the plot because I just did not understand what it was. Now, this book is going to be very hard to describe for this review, hard to summarize, I guess, because it is so incomprehensible, really. This book is kind of it's kind of a mind trip, but it's also very difficult to decipher what's actually happening. But bear with me, and I'll do the best I can. So, City at the End of Time is a science fiction novel, but it is not just any science fiction novel. It is among the hardest of the hard science fiction I have ever read. Now, there's a distinction between soft and hard science fiction. Soft science fiction really isn't based around any actual science, it just kind of uses science fiction as a means to explore certain ideas or issues. Like, it's kind of like what Robert Heinlein and Philip K. Dick did. That's pretty soft science fiction. But then you have hard science fiction like Michael Crichton and Werner Vinge. And this is definitely hard science fiction. And it is, like I said, among the hardest of the hard science fiction I have ever encountered. This book is very, very dense scientifically. This book deals with concepts such as quantum mechanics and lots of physics, and the science basically is so conjectural and theoretical that it approaches and actually pretty much is just fantasy. In fact, I think you would not be remiss in describing this book as a work not of science fiction, but rather of science fantasy. And I believe that Greg Bear himself would probably concur with that assessment, because this book was written, I believe, as a loving homage to William Hope Hodgson's novel The Nightland. Now, if you don't know who William Hope Hodgson was, he was an early author of cosmic horror science fiction. He wrote a book entitled The House on the Borderland, which I actually have over here and have read, and it's pretty good. But I haven't read The Nightland. But Greg Bear apparently did, and he wanted to write this book to kind of pay tribute to that, because they both kind of have the same vibe, the same feel. But what actually is the plot of City at the End of Time? Well, it is divided in two time periods. One appears to be modern day Seattle, and follows three characters, predominantly Jack, Jenny, and Daniel. And then the other plot thread occurs trillions, like trillions and trillions of years in the future, and it is set at the very end of the universe. The universe is being consumed by something called the Typhon, and reality is being replaced by something called the chaos. Well, the laws of physics are breaking down, being rewritten, matter is being warped and mutated within this chaos, which is a product of the Typhon, whatever that is. And your guess is as good as mine, because Greg Bear never explains shit in this book. That's why it's so frustrating to me. But anyway, one half of the book follows characters named Jabrasi and Tiadba in the incredibly far future of 14 zeros. That's how you denote the time period in this book. As Greg Bear breaks up the different parts by denoting the number of zeros after the number of the time period. So it's 14 zeros in the future at the very end of the universe, and then the other half is set in modern day Seattle and follows Jack, Jenny, and Daniel. And these characters are connected across an incredible expanse of time. They're connected. They're kind of, I guess, like reincarnations of each other. The characters in Seattle are referred to as fate shifters. They have the ability to transfer their consciousness into alternate versions of themselves across different world lines, hence the quantum mechanics aspect of it. And they have some magical rocks that do something. Again, it's never explained because nothing in this book is ever explained whatsoever. And somehow these characters in the past and the present, I mean, the past and the distant, or the present and the distant future, I should say, uh, they're related. I think they are like reincarnations of each other or something. And there is an event known as the terminus where the Typhon is compressing all of space time down into one point, which means that the future and the past literally gets crammed together there at the end of the book. You still with me? I hope, because this book is kind of, it flies. When it goes, it flies, and it kind of just hurls stuff at you. But space time is being compressed, and the past and the future are being jumbled together, and then the characters in modern day Seattle and their reincarnated descendants in the 14-0 time period eventually meet each other in the chaos at the end of time, which is the end of all times, and then something happens. And when I say something happens, that's all I can say, because I would be hard pressed to say what that something actually is, because this book, once again, does not explain anything. So that's all I can give you in terms of the plot of City at the End of Time. That is all I can give you because, like I said, I don't know what to make of this plot. This book is so inscrutable and opaque that I did not know what was happening half the time. And that really was a knock against this book. This book actually is not a very good book at all, really. And it really hurts me to say that because it could have been, and I wanted it to be, because this is the kind of science fiction that I like. It is based around some real hard science and some very interesting science, at least to me, at that. But it went too far. It threw so much in here and it did not explain any of it that I couldn't make heads or tails of what was actually happening. So, to break down the pros and the cons of this book, such as they are, the plot is incomprehensible. Nothing is ever explained. So, literally, the stumbling summary that I just gave is about all I can do. But the writing in this book, now that was a big saving grace in my eyes with this book. The writing was actually really strong, stronger than you normally get with a lot of science fiction of this ilk. Greg Bear actually could write. He really could write. This book on a prose level is a cut above what most science fiction of this type is, because science fiction does not have the best reputation when it comes to writing, or at least hard sci-fi doesn't, because a lot of the authors who write this stuff are, basically scientists themselves, and so they're more interested in getting down the ideas and concepts, but not so much in making that elegant. But Greg Bear actually did. This book actually was pretty well written, honestly. So I want to give it major points in that area because it was much better than a lot of science fiction of this type would be. But that's about it. The characters in this book, and there were a few. You've got Jack, Jenny, Daniel in the modern day Seattle, and then Jabrasi and Tiadba in the distant future end of the universe plot thread, and those characters were awful. Every single character in this book was amazingly undeveloped. In fact, I'm going to say this right now. City at the End of Time has, I think, the worst characters I have ever encountered in a book, ever, or almost. It's definitely up there in terms of books with underdeveloped characters. This is right at the top of the pile. Greg Bear was a decent prose stylist, but damn, he didn't put any effort into making these characters rounded or fleshed out at all. He didn't even try. These characters have no personality. They have no backstory. Um, they don't have any kind of defining attributes. They all sound the same, and it's just awful. It is absolutely awful when it comes to the characters in this book. I did not care about any of them. I did not feel like I knew any of them. It was a complete miss in that area. But the concepts were interesting, and that is, along with the writing, basically all I can say positive in this book's defense is that the concepts were very interesting. Not only does Greg Bear play around with quantum mechanics and theoretical physics and science that is, again, so conjectural that it's basically just fantasy. Um, he also toys with Hindu mythology, and he also kind of makes a metatextual reference to William Hope Hodgson. William Hope Hodgson and his book, The Nightland, are directly alluded to within this book, so it kind of has a slight meta quality. But it's all so jumbled together that I don't know what the point was. In the ending of this book, well, first of all, about the last, this is a pretty sizable book. It's 476 pages. And about the last 100 or 150 so pages is incredibly boring. It is when you would not think that the end of the universe itself could be so boring, but man, it is. So everything hits the fan at the end, and then you get characters journeying across warped, you know, psychedelic wastelands called the Chaos for hundreds of pages, and it just drug on and on. And the ending, the way it actually concluded, I don't have a damn clue what happened. Like literally, I cannot tell you what happened at this ending. It was so vague, so ambiguously described, so unclear what was supposed to be happening that I don't know what happened. It's just so frustrating because this book had the makings of a real masterpiece. Like the ideas at play in this book, I just find endlessly fascinating. Like quantum mechanics, I use that stuff in my first book that I wrote. And you know, I'm far from qualified to talk about that, but talk about it I did nonetheless. But at least I did it in a comprehensible manner. Greg Bear did not. This book is so confusing. It honestly is something that you would just have to read to see how confusing it really is. But the concepts, such as they are fascinating to me at least. I love reading about quantum mechanics or learning about quantum mechanics because of all the implications that it has for our world about time, you know, or worlds, not just world. You know, that's so interesting to me. So this book had a bit of goodwill from me going into it, but that was not enough. And it goes to show that character will always be the most important part of any story. And when it is lacking in the area of the characters, it suffers majorly. And this book did. So to rate City at the End of Time by Greg Bear, I'm going to have to give this maybe possibly a C minus or maybe a D plus would actually be more fitting and honest. So take your pick. If you have read this book and you like it, you know, C minus is the best I can do, but really it's probably sitting more at like a D plus level. Like I said, this book has a remarkably low rating on Goodreads, and I can see why. Because I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what happened in it. It was so confusing, and its obdurate refusal to explain anything, did not alleviate that at all as the story went on. So what you get is an incomprehensible mess of a book that is admittedly well written in a prose sense, and has some interesting ideas at its heart, but you can't make heads or tails of it, and the characters were awful, truly awful. So yeah, C minus, probably D plus is more fitting. That's how I would rate City at the End of Time. But have you read City at the End of Time by Greg Bear? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I have said about it here today. If you have not read City at the End of Time, I really can't recommend this because while this book had the potential to be great, and there are flashes here and there of greatness of it trying to create some kind of coherence from the mess that is this book, it never gets off the ground. So I'm not going to recommend this. This was a swing and a miss, although a pretty ambitious swing. I'll give it that. This was an ambitious book, but it was kind of a miss for me. I wanted to like it so much, but I couldn't, so I really can't recommend it. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.